Hi, you're listening to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast, produced by the Get Global Network.
This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now.
Let's get to it. So I'm going to start this week's podcast off with a little update on what's currently going on over in New York on the NYPD with regards to what's going on in the case of Eric Garner, who was choked to death by an NYPD officer back in 2014. Yeah, coming up on the 5-year anniversary of his death in July of this year. And right now, they are in the process of conducting an administrative hearing with regards to whether or not this officer, Pantaleo, will be disciplined. So the way it's reported is that the NYPD has a chief surgeon, apparently, and his name is Eli Kleinman. Now, this NYPD chief surgeon, Eli Kleinman, claims that Eric Garner was not put in a chokehold. So all of what we saw on videotape by that very brave young man who's now, suffering for his role in recording that, we didn't see a chokehold. That's not what we saw. They're describing, this NYPD chief surgeon is describing the officer's action as a takedown. Semantics, right? Wordsmithing. Tomato. He's calling it a takedown. And this Kleinman also said in his report to the Administrative Review Board that proof of the fact that Garner wasn't choked is that there were no injuries associated with the chokehold. Like, there was no problems with Garner's trachea, as if the only evidence of or proof of or substantiation of being choked would be somehow damage to your trachea. Are you kidding me? And this is their chief surgeon listen, we understand that this chief surgeon has a symbiotic relationship with the NYPD. His obligation is to those police officers, to that police department. And so, of course, he would say, based on his professional opinion, that there were no injuries associated with the chokehold, rather that Garner's death was attributed to the fact that he was in poor health. This chief surgeon, Eli Kleinman, says that Garner suffered from obesity, asthma, hypertension, and diabetes. And that's what caused his death. So I guess NYPD Chief Surgeon Eli Kleinman would want us to believe that had Pantaleo not been there that day, on that sidewalk, that Eric Garner would have died right there on the spot from being obese, having asthma, hypertension, and diabetes, and rather the NYPD officers were just in the wrong place at the wrong time? It was just a coincidence that they were there because Eric Garner was going to die anyway because of his poor health. It's insulting. It's insulting and it's disingenuous for this police professional chief surgeon on the NYPD to assert such a ridiculous report. And so while this administrative hearing only began in June of last year, it continues. Now, this is administrative only because, remember, a grand jury has already decided not to indict Pantaleo, so that ship has come and gone. DOJ evidently is still dragging their feet and pretending like they're going to do something, and they have until July of this year. So it sounds like, I don't know, do they have a 5-year period to make a decision about bringing civil rights charges against Pantaleo? July 17th sounds like the anniversary date of Eric Garner's death. So don't hold your breath expecting DOJ to do the right thing, because we've not seen them do that currently under this administration for sure with regards to any deadly use of police force. And so while the Civilian Complaint Review Board is the entity that is responsible for prosecuting this administrative case, one of the things that seems to give them pause is that Kleinman came up with this nonsense determination without reviewing the autopsy or any other medical reports. So the question that begs to be answered then is, if he didn't review any medical reports, how the heck did he come to the determination that Eric Garner had all of these medical issues, obesity, asthma, hypertension, diabetes? Where did Kleinman get that from? Anyway, so Pantaleo's disciplinary administrative trial is set to begin on May the 13th. And again, I'll keep you posted. Now, last week I appeared in an episode of Finding Justice, which aired on the BET network. And the episode was regarding police brutality. I also had the opportunity last week to appear on a segment on KPCC Talk Radio here locally on a show called Air Talk. And I was speaking about police-related issues, as I often do, nationally and locally. But more specifically on KPCC, I was talking with, debating with, if you will, the police chief in Citrus Heights, California. Now, this police chief is also the president of the Police Chiefs Association. And so what I want to do is I want to play that short segment of our discussion together to just give you a little insight, if you didn't already know, into why I believe things are not going to change in my lifetime with regards to the problems that I see on police departments, not only here in California, but across the nation. This police chief represents police chiefs here in the state of California, but you understand that there are similar organizations like this across the country, and recognizing that there are about 18,000 police departments, when you realize that police chiefs like this guy that you're going to hear in a few minutes goes back home and talks to his officers about the kinds of things that he believes and supports in terms of their field activity and how they conduct and comport themselves in minority communities, poor white communities. When you listen to what this guy has to say, it's clear why we continue to have the problems that we have. And it's clear to me that these problems are going to persist. You will hear this police chief, who, by the way, listen, know this, police chiefs are administrators, okay? I personally have never in my 20 years wearing an LAPD uniform as a patrol officer and a patrol supervisor, patrolling the streets of Los Angeles in all 4 geographic bureaus that the city is divided into: South Bureau, Central Bureau, West Bureau, and Valley Bureau. During my 20-year career, I've never, ever seen a police chief going, what we say, eastbound through the houses after a suspect. I've never, ever seen a police chief involved in a car pursuit, foot chase, taking a suspect into custody, unless, of course, it was staged for a, photo shoot, right, camera op for the news, right? Police chiefs don't do that. They're administrators. They sit behind a desk and pontificate on what we do, ground pounders, me, as a patrol officer and as a patrol supervisor, because listen, as a patrol supervisor, I'm driving around in my car in uniform and I still do police work. If I see something, I get involved, or I call officers to assist me to get involved. And so for this police chief, because he had 30 years on the job, I don't know how many of those were actually boots on the ground, if you will, debate me about what I did, what I lived. It almost sounds when you listen to him as if he's reading from some scripted piece of paper that was in front of him with regards to AB392, which is a bill that's currently being discussed and debated here in California, regarding whether or not officers can use deadly force when it's reasonable or when it's necessary. The hope is that AB 392 will require officers to de-escalate a situation when possible, and if they don't de-escalate a situation when possible, when reasonable, then they could face criminal liability. And so this police chief, this president of the Police Chiefs Association, is vehemently opposed to that, and he's going to read off his paper to you why that is. And I just find it very disturbing that this administrator, who's not boots on the ground, but who absolutely will go back to his troops and tell those boots on the ground how to conduct and comport themselves when they're dealing with folks who look like me, black folks. Yeah, you'll see, it'll be very clear to you why this thing is not getting any better, why there is no accountability when police officers use deadly force as a first resort rather than a last resort, why police chiefs are so willing to minimize and mitigate that bad behavior. It will be very clear to you when you listen to the police chief, current police chief on Citrus Heights Police Department. And listen, I don't know how many officers he's supervising over there, how many officers he's managing, commanding over there. I imagine it's a small department, and so, he tries at several different points during our discussion to devalue my experience, my training, to insult me. So evidently this police chief, Ronald A. Lawrence, over there in Citrus Heights, I took a quick look at his bio. I didn't know who this guy was before we went on the air together. And to be quite honest with you, I really had no interest in knowing anything more about him after we concluded our discussion, if you will. And then I thought about it as I prepared for this broadcast, and I wanted to share with you because I know what I know. And listen, when you listen to me talk, or if you ever see me speak, you won't see me with paperwork or statistics or numbers, because I don't have to read off to you anything that anyone has prepared and given me to say. I speak to you about what I did because it's my life and I can just talk to you about it. But I find it very interesting because I'm always of the belief that any police officer who's moving around and jumping around from doggone police department to police department, there's a reason why. And haven't we seen that to be true when we hear of police officers who engage in bad behavior, like, let's say, Eric Casebolt, the police officer who over in McKinney, Texas, straddled that bikini-clad teenage girl because she was at a pool party, a place where he didn't think she needed to be, and was assaulting her. Well, Eric Casebolt, before he worked at McKinney Police Department, he had worked at two other police departments. I believe he was a Texas State Ranger and an Oklahoma City police officer prior to coming to McKinney. 3 departments. Now, he's a young guy, but already in his little life, he's been on 3 different police departments. And listen, you understand you can't be a police officer until you're 21. I'm assuming that's the same for all 18,000 police departments. By the time Eric Casebolt is in his mid-30s, I forget how old he was exactly, but I'll just say 32. He's already been on 3 police departments? What the what? Right? Police officers move around because they do bad things and because they're given that gift of resignation, and they don't want folks to know how ill-suited they are to really do the job, so they are allowed to resign rather than being terminated. And then they move on to another police department and they start anew as if they're all great and good, and they have this illustrious historical record, if you will, about their police career. Now listen, hold up. I'm not saying that this is the case for Citrus Heights Police Chief Ronald A. Lawrence. I don't know his personnel record, but I'm just saying that's what happened with Eric Casebolt, right? There was another police officer by the name of Melendez over in Inkster, Michigan, who had been given the gift of resignation and moved around from police department to police department. William Melendez over in Inkster, he didn't kill anyone, but he did beat the shit out of Floyd Dent over in Inkster, Michigan. And then, of course, Timothy Loman, who We know shot and killed 12-year-old Tamir Rice, been on many police departments, and even after killing Tamir Rice, murdering that baby, was given a second chance, air quotes, by a sheriff who thought he was deserving of that and hired him. But because of intense community pressure and protests, Timothy Loehmann ultimately wound up quitting that job. Darren Wilson, before he shot and killed Mike Brown on the Ferguson Police Department, he had been on another police department that went defunct because the whole doggone department was so ill-suited, so awful, if you will, that they just disbanded the entire doggone police department. And so you have Darren Wilson, who's been on multiple departments. Let me tell you about young Ronald A. Lawrence over there, police chief in Citrus Heights. Prior to becoming the police chief over in Citrus Heights, Ronald Lawrence served as a police captain with the Rockland Police Department. He was a lieutenant with the Palo Alto Police Department. He was a sergeant and police officer with the West Sacramento Police Department. And he was a police officer with the Lincoln Police Department and a doggone deputy sheriff with the Placer County and Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. Are you kidding me, sir? Let me just back up and let me just do the math real quick, because right now I am reading and I want to make sure that I get this right. So in his 30 years, he has worked for, according to his bio, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 police departments. Wow. 6 police departments in 30 years? What is wrong with Police Chief Ronald A. Lawrence? I'm just asking. I don't know anything is wrong. I'm just saying, what the hell? 6 police departments? What is this guy running from? What is he running to? I don't know. I'm just asking. But you know, if he were a misfit toy, it would make sense to me that he would ultimately be the president, which he is, of the California Police Chiefs Association. He was appointed to the board of directors on the CPCA in 2011, and then he was selected as their third president in 2016. So he has been on the CPCA for 8 years. So while he wants to take issue with what I say about being a police officer and being in patrol and doing patrol work, when, you know, this guy's been bouncing around from little police department to little police department and then spending the rest of his time as an administrator, because understand, once you get to the rank of lieutenant, which is what he was on the Palo Alto Police Department, and then he made captain on the Rockland Police Department, why did he just sit down and just stay at one department and just promote? Why is he moving around? I'm bothered by that. Sergeant over in West Sacramento. That was probably about the last time he really had anything to do with patrol work, when he was over in West Sacramento Police Department. And again, it sounds like a small agency. I don't know. But West Sacramento Police Department sounds like a small department. And then he was a police officer in the Lincoln Police Department. Not sure where the Lincoln Police Department is. It's probably here in California. Deputy sheriff, you know, those guys are typically, you know, in the jails unless they have a small contingency of officers who work out in patrol. My guess is, my belief is, I don't know it to be true, but I'm believing that Citrus Heights Police Chief probably didn't spend a whole lot of time in patrol. And that's why he was reading from that piece of paper when he was trying to debate me about what I lived and did for actually 20 full solid years in patrol in a major metropolitan police department, LAPD, in South Central Los Angeles. So, when you listen, it becomes painfully obvious that the good old boy network is still in full effect. And so what I want Police Chief Ronald Lawrence over at Citrus Heights Police Department to know, sir, is that I will stack my 20 years in uniform on the Los Angeles Police Department, a premier police department, against your 30 years sitting behind a desk over in Citrus Heights, California. I will stack my experience, sir, against your experience all day long. And so listen to this discussion. Listen to his words, and it will become painfully clear to you why we are where we are today and why there's so much more that we need to do. And so I will be speaking on today, Tuesday, in Sacramento to legislators with regards to AB392, and I will assert pretty much the same thing that you're going to hear me say in my discussion on KPCC radio with regards to why I support AB 392. And this is the kind of legislation really that we need, not only here in California, but across the 18,000 police departments that exist nationally.
As we come in with Black Sabbath's The Wizard, chosen by Ethan Service, his last day with us, engineering Air Talk. One of the prompters for new legislation in California over use of force was the shooting death of Stephon Clark last year in his grandparents' backyard. Clark, according to reports of neighbors, had been breaking into cars on the street in front of where his grandparents live. He led officers on a chase going from the backyard to backyard on the street where his grandparents lived. He ended up in their backyard, and with a cell phone in his hand, officers, very dimly lit night, shot and killed him in the grandparents' backyard. AB 392 is a state legislative bill that would create what observers say is the strictest use of force law in the country. With us is retired Los Angeles Police Department Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. Thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Larry.
What would this bill do?
Well, what it's going to do is try to bring about a little accountability with regards to when officers use deadly force. And I know that there's a lot of pushback from unions around the state with regards to whether or not it's reasonable versus necessary. They're looking to change the wording. Now, I understand that this is not going to fix the problem, but it's a great first step, in my opinion.
The Stephon Clark shooting, obviously controversial, but do you think that wasn't a defensible shooting despite the fact he was unarmed?
Well, listen, police officers are trained professionals, and we have shoot-don't-shoot scenarios that hopefully prepare us for these kinds of incidents. We know that it's not uncommon for folks to carry a gun. To carry a cell phone. That's something that every millennial has now, right? And others. And so you have to have specific target identification when you pull the trigger. You need to know what you're shooting at. You can't think. It shouldn't be allowed to say, oh, well, I just thought it was this, and therefore I take a life. And so when officers think they saw something and they're incorrect, there should be a consequence for that kind of behavior. And in this instance, there wasn't. They're minimizing and mitigating the officer's behavior. They're dirtying up the young man with prior bad acts, and none of that has anything to do with there was no immediate defense of life, the officers or anyone else when they pull the trigger.
We're talking with Cheryl Dorsey, a retired LAPD sergeant who was on the force for 2 decades. Also joining us, the president of the California Police Chiefs Association and the chief of police in the Citrus Heights Police Department, Ronald A. Lawrence. Chief Lawrence, thank you for being with us. What are your concerns about this bill?
Well, Larry, thank you for having me. I'll tell you that what Cheryl's statements just said, and all due difference, she's absolutely incorrect, and she's not sharing with you the entire facts of that case. She's missing a whole part of the reality there. But specific to this bill, Assembly Bill 392, it seeks to change and raise the legal standard that was codified by the United States Supreme Court in 1989, which has set a long-established objectively reasonable standard on the use of force in the United States. Unfortunately, AB 392 would undermine the U.S. Supreme Court's standing decision by removing that reasonable standard from police and require force be restricted to only that which was later, after the fact, deemed necessary, introducing a dangerous hindsight judgment of police officers' use of force.
And so let's take the Stephon Clark example, since that seems to be the biggest precipitator of this legislation. So in hindsight, of course, we know that he was not armed. He didn't drop his cell phone, as I understand it, when asked to do so. The officers claimed that they were in fear for their life and thought that he was armed. So in hindsight, they were wrong, and it led to his life. How would this bill potentially change that burden of proof or the definition of acceptable use?
Well, as Cheryl pointed out, that many people we know carry cell phones, and she also inadvertently pointed out that many people carry firearms, which is true also, but I think she said that by mistake. The reality in this case is Stephon Clark was in a position where he actually charged at the officers, pointing the cell phone at them. It was, as you pointed out, it was a very dark backyard. The police officers had no idea that it was his grandparents' backyard, despite what the rhetoric might lead one to believe. Those officers believed they were under attack by somebody who had a weapon. There's no questioning that at all. The district attorney has very eloquently laid out the facts, and those officers were scared for their lives, and they took reasonable action to defend themselves. And there's no other way around this. AB 392 would now criminalize police officers for doing a very dangerous and untenable job to protect our communities. It's going to make California unsafe.
What do you think is the potential, when you say make California unsafe, what is the potential impact either in police tactics or in people going into law enforcement?
Oh, it's horrific. Already we have officers that people that don't want to get into our profession. Recruitment's already a problem. If people know that they're going to take on a job that potentially, in a split-second decision, when they revert to their training, if by chance that they use something that was later deemed by a court to be unnecessary, where they could have possibly used something else, if that's going to lead them to prison, people are not going to get into our profession at all.
Sergeant Dorsey, you want to respond to that? And I'm curious, would this at all have been a disincentive for you to go into law enforcement if this bill was on the books?
Well, listen, everybody who wants to be the police shouldn't be the police. And so understand there are certain dangers that are inherent with what it is that we do. And I did this for 20 years in a uniform, and I know that those officers had the benefit of an air unit. They had the benefit of concealment and cover in regards to the Stephon Clark case. And so there was no urgency. There was no exigent circumstance. They could have freeze-framed and de-escalated the situation. They chose not to. Why? Because great deference is given to what a police officer says. And when a police officer says, I was in fear for my life, or I thought I saw something that we now know they didn't see, jurors want to side with the officers. They want to believe that the officers were in fear. We're trained professionals, and you don't get to take a life based on something that you think. You need to know. And if you're not sure, and if you don't want to do this job now because you're going to be held accountable, then those are the people who should not do this job. Any profession that you have requires split-second decisions. When I get in my car, I've got to make a split-second decision about what it is that I'm going to do. And if you don't have the skill set, the temperament, or the judgment to make those kinds of decisions, then this is not the profession for you, and that's okay.
So you, in a case like this, with Mr. Clark's behavior, do you think he bears any responsibility for that, or that this all is attributable to poor tactics by the officers?
Absolutely, he bears culpability. Listen, I've had many people run for me. I've chased people over fences, and I know what that's like. Absolutely, he has culpability. But he's not the trained professional. We are the trained professionals, and at some point, we need to figure out, we are expected to make a snap judgment decision based on our training and experience. We're expected to rely on that and not take a life because you can't catch them, because they won't come here, because they're not compliant. When officers do that, when they use deadly force because somebody's not compliant, it's not about gaining control. It's about punishment. And those officers fired an excessive amount of rounds at Stephon Clark. There was no, like we're trained on the LAPD, 2 rounds in rapid succession, reassess the situation. They basically emptied their magazines. And so this was about punishment, clear and simple.
Now, I had always thought the training when deadly force is employed is to stop the individual. I didn't realize there's like a maximum of rounds that you're supposed to fire. Is that the case?
Listen, I can't speak to anyone else's training. I can only tell you about the Los Angeles Police Department, and where we're trained is to fire 2 rounds in rapid succession and assess the situation, assess whether or not the threat still exists. If you're just emptying a magazine and firing 15 rounds because that's what you have available to you, then when do you assess whether or not the threat even still exists?
Well, that's the first time I've ever heard about the 2-round and reassess training at the LAPD. Cheryl Dorsey for 20 years at the LA Police Department as a sergeant. Ronald A. Lawrence, California Police Chiefs Association president. So, Chief Lawrence, your response, she says one of the points here is that this was essentially punishment to Stephon Clark, and you know this new bill would try and prevent that from happening.
Well, Larry, Cheryl's outlandish emotional rhetoric right there is exactly the problem that we're experiencing with this bill. A lot of what she says is very emotionally charged, and that's what we're finding with the problem here. We can't get down and really talk about what needs to happen in a very serious manner for California. Since mid-2018, we've worked diligently in meeting with the authors of AB392, the Attorney General, the ACLU, other legislators and stakeholders and community groups to collaborate and provide our expertise. But despite all of our best efforts in providing police practices, best practices for consideration, the authors of AB392 have decided to introduce this bill rejecting police expertise, to include police chiefs, to include line level. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'll tell you that the reason to use deadly force is because you're trying to stop an imminent threat, and the objective is to stop the threat.
If, though, you've got officers who help to create the threat because of their tactics, that they put the suspect into a position that, you know, even in hindsight would not have been necessary, and the officers made mistakes, should they not bear some degree of legal exposure for that, for what the bitter fruit of that tactic ended up being?
Well, Larry, what you said is a great topic, because the reality is use of force and violence in California is not going to stop because of AB 392. What we need to do is train our officers to the very best degree that we possibly can, and AB 392 doesn't have any training components in it. Officers are going to resort to their best training. Doesn't matter if it's going to be something that's going to hold them criminally liable or not. They're going to be scared, and they're going to react to training and how they were trained to do. AB 392 does not include that type of training. To criminalize that is woefully reckless, but training is the place to focus.
Sergeant Dorsey, is it your view that with the threshold being changed in officer responsibility, that they're going to be more cautious, or they're going to be more consistent in the way they deal with these kinds of potential use of force circumstances?
Well, let me say this. First of all, I find it offensive that he would say that my rhetoric is emotional. I don't know if he said that because I'm a female, but let me say with regards to what should happen to officers, accountability will change this. We know that AB 392 in and of itself is not going to solve the problem, but it's a good first step. Absolutely, officers need to be trained. And listen, let's not be afraid to admit that poor tactics lead to poor shootings, and poor tactics led to the death of Stephon Clark. And unless and until police chiefs and union leaders are willing to admit that there's a problem, then they will never admit that there is something that needs to be fixed.
So, but specifically, you think if this law, let's say, had been in effect in this tragic circumstance, you think officers might have employed different tactics? They would have thought twice about it, knowing that what sort of before the fact change do you think this might have made?
I can't get into an officer's heart or head, but what I can tell you is that if officers, I believe, as a supervisor, if officers understand that they are going to be held accountable when they violate policy, law, regulations, I believe that they will act accordingly. When there is no accountability, then you don't deter bad behavior. What did these officers learn in the murder of Stephon Clark? Nothing. They will live to offend again because the prosecutor over there found what they did to be reasonable. And so when they see another black man running with a cell phone, they won't hesitate to shoot him too in the back because they have learned nothing from the shooting death of Stephon Clark. We've done nothing to dissuade, to deter poor tactics, which I say leads to poor shooting.
And you use that term murder intentionally. You're comfortable using that term for this incident?
Absolutely.
Cheryl Dorsey, retired LAPD sergeant for 2 decades on the job at the LAPD. Ronald A. Lawrence, president of the California Police Chiefs Association, and he's the chief of the suburban Sacramento Citrus Heights Police Department. Chief Lawrence, quick response, sir, and then I need to wrap.
Well, I'm glad Cheryl's retired because that's an unfortunate viewpoint she has. I think that in the Stephon Clark situation, to answer your question, Larry, what will result is officers will not respond as quickly as they do today. They will not be protecting our victims as they do today. Let's take, for example, if Stephon Clark, take him out of the equation. Let's say it was some other person in a backyard, and that person had broken into cars and was about to break into a house, and someone's calling 911. Very similar facts to Stephon Clark, by the way. The officers responded diligently to protect people. Are we to wait until he breaks into a house and commits some heinous crime? I don't think that's what California wants.
I want to thank you both, Ronald A. Lawrence, Cheryl Dorsey, joining us on Air Talk. The bill is in the California legislature, and it would change the threshold, making what would be the first of its kind law in the United States if California ends up adopting it.
And now it's time for Did You Know? So this week, I think I want to end Did You Know with a little good news. I came across a story, and it was really very touching to me, and I wanted to share it with you. There's a young man by the name of Cameron Scott. He's 8 years old, and a couple of years ago, he fell down some stairs, and it led to his family, of course, taking him to the doctor and trying to make sure that he was okay. He was having a little back pain, and the doctor suggested to the parents that they do an MRI. And in doing that MRI, they found out that Cameron was suffering from brain cancer, stage 4 brain cancer. And so what I want to report to you today, 2 years later, is that young Cameron Scott, who is an avid Batman fan, is now cancer-free. And I just wanted to wish young Cameron and his parents, Tamika and Wendell Scott, continued blessings and good health. Until next time, you guys, be good and be safe.
This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now. This is America. Don't catch you slipping now.
You have been listening to the Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast, produced by the Get Global Network. Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey is a television commentator, social justice advocate, and is also well known for her book, Black and Blue, Creation of a Social Advocate, an autobiography of her 20-year career as a black woman on the Los Angeles Police Department. The book details what she learned as an LAPD insider. Sergeant Dorsey can be contacted through her website, sgtdorseyspeaks.com, or via any of her social media sites like YouTube and Facebook. Take the time to subscribe to her YouTube channel and also subscribe to this podcast via major podcast networks like iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and many others. The podcast is also available on wireless speaker systems like Alexa and Sonos.